Hey there, history buffs. Before you doze off, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss the mind-blowing oddities we're about to dive into. Ever heard of medieval punishment by rat? Or how about the ancient Greek practice of using urine for teeth whitening? Yes, you heard that right. Today, we'll explore the bizarre side of history that makes you go, what were they thinking? Imagine this, it's 1347, and the Black Death is sweeping across Europe. But did you know that some people believed it was caused by bad air? Yes, folks, the idea of miasma had people holding their breath while they braved the stench of their own ignorance. And speaking of ignorance, ever wondered why medieval knights were so obsessed with chivalry? Was it to impress fair maidens, or were they just really bad at flirting? Let's not forget the delightful practice of trial by ordeal, where innocent people were dunked in water to see if they floated, because obviously, water is the ultimate lie detector. Or how about the ancient Romans, who thought it was perfectly normal to feast while reclining on couches, sometimes indulging in vomit-inducing purges to make room for more food? And what about the Great Fire of London in 1666? A disaster, sure, but did you know it started from a simple bakery mishap? The lesson here: don't underestimate the power of a poorly supervised baguette. So, if you're ready for bizarre facts, strange dates, and the oddities that history forgot to mention, stick around. Make sure to turn on loop so this episode repeats until you fall asleep, because who knew history could be this entertaining? Buckle up, it's going to be a wild ride through time. In the dimly lit halls of medieval monasteries, where the air was thick with the scent of incense and the low murmur of prayer, a most peculiar saga unfolded, one that revolved around the surprisingly dramatic topic of candle wax reuse policies. Yes, dear reader, you heard that right. While kings waged wars and knights jousted for glory, monks were embroiled in a fervent debate over the most efficient use of wax. Let us embark on this illuminating journey through the ages, starting from the earliest records, shall we? The earliest records, 6th century, Italy. Our tale begins in the 6th century, specifically in the Italian region of Campania. The Benedictine order, founded by Saint Benedict of Nursia, took a keen interest in candle production. Why, you ask? Well, to maintain their rigorous schedule of prayer, a monk required at least 4 candles per day, each burning for a minimum of 4 hours. That's 16 hours of candlelight, or 60 minutes of glorious illumination. It's no wonder they were determined to stretch their wax to the very last drip. The earliest known documentation of candle reuse comes from the Rule of Saint Benedict, written around 529 AD. In this seminal text, our dear Saint Benedict advised monks to use the wax with great care. But what did great care really mean? Were they to hoard every drop like a miser? Or perhaps they were to engage in a candle recycling effort reminiscent of today's eco-friendly initiatives? One can only imagine the conversations that took place in those drafty cloisters. Brother, do you think we can melt down last week's stubs and make a new candle, or will that anger the candle spirits? The Dark Ages, 9th century, France. Fast forward to the 9th century, where our story takes a rather amusing turn in the region of Normandy, France. The Carolingian Empire was burgeoning, and the monks were busy not only with religious duties but also with the art of candle making. Around 850 AD, a monk named Hincmar of Reims proposed an audacious idea: why not gather all the leftover wax from the monastery, melt it down, and mold it into new candles? The audacity! Imagine the scene: a group of monks, clad in their brown tunics, gathered around a massive cauldron, stirring melted wax while debating the finer points of theological doctrine. Is it ethical to reuse wax that has been burned during a prayer for the soul of a deceased? One monk might have pondered. What if the wax carries the sins of its previous life? Another would counter with a raised eyebrow. The candle wax reuse policy was not only a matter of practicality but also of moral integrity. The Reformation era, 16th century, England. By the time we reached the 16th century, the Protestant Reformation was shaking the very foundations of Christendom, and monks in England were still obsessively reusing their candle wax. In 1540, Sir Thomas More, a staunch Catholic and former Lord Chancellor, penned a rather sarcastic treatise titled The Waxen Worm. In this work, he ridiculed those who complained about the ineffectiveness of reused candle wax. He quipped, "If your prayers are answered, does it matter if the light flickered from a second-hand candle?" More's writings sparked a wave of candle debates throughout England. Monks began to adopt strict policies on wax reuse. Here are some of the more absurd regulations that surfaced. 1. The three-use rule: candle stubs could only be reused up to 3 times. After that, it was deemed too sinful to continue burning. Imagine being the monk who had to enforce this rule. 2. The scent test: if a candle had been burned with the scent of a particularly pungent prayer, perhaps during a particularly long confession, it was deemed unsuitable for reuse. Brothers were known to engage in heated arguments over the best scent profiles for their candles. 3. The illuminated ledger: monasteries began keeping detailed records of candle usage, including the date, the prayer associated with each candle, and the number of reuses. One particularly enterprising monk even attempted to create a candle calendar to track optimal reuse cycles. Can you imagine the excitement of a monk finding a particularly well-preserved stub from a feast day celebration? Aha! This candle has blessed the feast of Saint Bartholomew. I shall reuse it for the next harvest prayer. The Age of Enlightenment, 17th century, Germany. As we glide into the 17th century, we find ourselves in Germany, where candle reuse policies became more convoluted than a Baroque cathedral. In 1655, a monk named Brother Wolfgang von Licht, a self-proclaimed candle connoisseur, proposed a revolutionary plan. He argued that the wax from candles used during significant ecclesiastical events should be preserved and transformed into sacred wax. This sacred wax would then be reserved for the holiest of occasions, like the Easter Vigil. But what about the other candles? Were they to be dismissed as mere common wax? The debates raged on as brother monks argued about the value of each wax scrap. A famous story emerged about a monk who accidentally melted down a sacred stub instead of a regular one. The ensuing chaos was legendary. The abbot, red-faced and furious, proclaimed, "Brother Wolfgang, the light of your folly has extinguished the sanctity of our prayers." The Industrial Age, 19th century, England. As we leap into the 19th century, the advent of industrialization brought about a new era in candle making, but the old traditions of wax reuse lingered on. In 1820, a group of monks in Yorkshire took it upon themselves to modernize the process. They devised a primitive wax recycling machine, affectionately dubbed the waxinator. This contraption was meant to melt down candle ends and mold them into new forms, but it was more of a fire hazard than an innovation. The waxinator became a source of amusement for the local villagers. Stories circulated about how one monk accidentally set the abbey's kitchen ablaze while testing the machine. "Oh, the irony," one villager remarked, "they wanted to save wax but almost burnt the whole place down." It's estimated that after that incident, the monks spent more time devising safety protocols than actually reusing wax. Maybe they should have taken a hint from that old saying, "Where there's smoke, there's a monk making poor decisions." The 20th century, World Wars and wax reuse. By the time the world plunged into the chaos of the World Wars, candle reuse policies became overshadowed by the need for practicality amid scarcity. In 1942, during World War II, a group of monks in Belgium decided to take their candle devotion to the next level. They began a candle donation program, where they collected used candles from the public, melted them down, and created new ones for wartime efforts. The initiative was a remarkable success, and it was said that these monks could produce up to 1,000 new candles per day. However, as the war wore on, the monks faced an unusual challenge, dealing with the influx of non-religious candle stubs. Picture this: a monk holding up a bright pink candle stub from a birthday party, exclaiming, "Surely, this can't be reused for the veneration of Saint Joseph." The modern era, 21st century, global. As we find ourselves in the 21st century, the art of candle making has become highly commercialized, and the days of monks debating wax reuse policies seem like a distant memory. However, the spirit of those medieval debates lingers on in the hearts of modern candle enthusiasts. Today, candle recycling has become a trendy topic in eco-conscious circles. One can only imagine what medieval monks would think of the upcycled candle movement. So, as we look back on the tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies, we might ask ourselves, was it really about the wax, or was it a reflection of deeper, spiritual concerns? Did these monks find enlightenment in their candle debates, or were they merely trying to avoid the wrath of the abbot? In the end, let us raise a glass, preferably filled with candle wax, and toast to the monks of old, whose passion for reuse and resourcefulness shines brightly through the ages. Here's to the flickering lights of history that illuminate our path, even if they were made from candle stubs. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. In the dim light of medieval monasteries, flickering candlelight illuminated not only the sacred texts but also the meticulous, if not downright tedious, policies regarding the reuse of candle wax. This rather obscure aspect of monastic life wasn't simply a matter of thriftiness, it was a confluence of construction methods, bureaucratic rules, and the daily grind of life as a monk. Construction methods and materials, circa 9th to 15th century. Candle-making in medieval times was a precise craft, often performed by monks themselves. The favored materials included tallow, beeswax, and, on occasion, plant-based waxes. 1. Tallow candles. Made from animal fat, primarily from cows and sheep. Cost-effective but produced a smoky flame and unpleasant odor. Often used in communal areas, where scent was less of a concern. 2. Beeswax candles. Preferred for their clean burn and pleasant aroma. More expensive than tallow, typically reserved for liturgical purposes or wealthy patrons. The process involved melting beeswax and pouring it into molds, which required precision and skill. 3. Plant-based waxes. Used as a last resort due to their inferior qualities. Varied by region, with some monasteries experimenting with local flora. The costs associated with candle production were significant. A monk might spend several days crafting candles, which necessitated careful budgeting and resource allocation. With a limited budget, monks had to make decisions that would affect their candle supplies for weeks or even months. Bureaucratic rules and punishments. In a world governed by strict monastic codes, the reuse of candle wax was not merely encouraged, it was mandated. The rule of Saint Benedict, established in the 6th century, provided a framework for monastic life, and by the 12th century, candles had become an integral part of liturgical events. Thus, wax reuse policies emerged, leading to a labyrinth of bureaucratic regulation. 1. Wax collection. Monks were required to collect drippings from used candles. The collected wax was then weighed and recorded, creating an early form of inventory management. 2. Recycling procedures. A monk designated as the candle keeper oversaw the wax recycling process. This role involved overseeing the melting and remolding of wax, a task that required both skill and patience. 3. Penalties for non-compliance. Monks found hoarding wax were subject to severe discipline, including lengthy penance and perhaps a reduction in rations. A particularly egregious offense could lead to being assigned to the dreaded candle dungeon, a dark room where the offender was made to contemplate their sins in the company of unsold candles. The irony. In a world striving for piety, the punishment for mismanaged wax could lead to more time spent in the candlelit dungeon than in prayer. Roles and job descriptions. The candle-making process required a complex hierarchy among the monks, each with specific roles. 1. The abbot. The head of the monastery, ultimately responsible for all resource management, including wax supplies. Often set the tone for the reuse policies, emphasizing sustainability. 2. The candle keeper. Charged with overseeing the wax recycling process. Knowledgeable in candle-making techniques and inventory management. 3. The novice. Younger monks who learned the craft and assisted the candle keeper. Tasked with the more labor-intensive aspects, such as collecting wax drippings and cleaning molds. 4. The librarian. While not directly involved in candle making, this role was crucial for maintaining records of candle production and usage. Often double-dutied as a scribe, writing down every wax-related transaction, because nothing says fun like a ledger of candle drippings. 5. The almoner. Responsible for distributing candles to the local community or for special liturgical events. Had to keep meticulous records to ensure the monastery didn't run out of candles, especially during high-demand seasons like Advent. Technical specs and inventories. With the rise of wax reuse policies came the need for meticulous record-keeping. Monasteries developed detailed inventories that detailed every aspect of candle production. 1. Wax inventory log. A ledger that recorded the type, quantity, and source of wax, alongside the date of production. Monks might even add annotations about the quality of the wax, like a medieval Yelp review: 2 stars for scent, 5 stars for burn time. 2. Candle specifications. Standard measurements for candle height and diameter were established, often around 12 inches tall and 1 inch in diameter. Each candle was expected to burn for a minimum of 3 hours, aligning with prayer times. 3. Testing procedures. Before a new batch was approved for liturgical use, a candle would undergo a trial burn. A committee of monks would observe the flame, jotting down notes on its stability and the rate of wax consumption, a process that could take hours. 4. Quality control. A monk would be tasked with inspecting the final product. If a candle failed to meet standards, it was sent back for re-education, a euphemism for being melted down and remade. 5. Distribution records. Logs of how many candles were given to the church, the poor, or liturgical events. A bit of intrigue existed around the distribution, as some monks might borrow a few candles for personal use or to impress a fellow monk at the next monastery over. The Candle Wars of 1203. In 1203, tensions reached a boiling point among rival monasteries over candle supplies. Known as the Candle Wars, this bizarre episode was sparked by accusations of wax hoarding. 1. The accusations. Monks from St. Benedict's Abbey claimed that their neighbors, the Order of the Tallow, were pilfering their candle drippings. A heated debate ensued, resulting in a wax-off, yes, a competition to see who could produce the most candles in a week. 2. The outcome. St. Benedict's Abbey emerged victorious, but not without consequences. They were now the proud but burdened owners of a mountain of wax, leading to a year-long candle surplus and some very tired monks. 3. The aftermath. The Candle Wars prompted the establishment of the Great Wax Accord, a set of rules governing candle production, distribution, and reuse, ensuring that no monk would ever again be left in the dark, literally or figuratively. Conclusion: the enduring legacy of candle reuse policies. The medieval monk candle wax reuse policies were a reflection of the era's values, where sustainability and thriftiness were prized in a world characterized by scarcity. While the bureaucratic rules and penalties might seem excessive, they showcase the commitment of these monks to their craft and their community. Today, We might chuckle at the thought of monks bickering over candle wax while the modern world navigates its own complexities of sustainability. But perhaps we can take a page from their book, if only to avoid the candle dungeon of our own making. In the end, the history of candle wax reuse in medieval monasteries is not just about wax, it's about the illuminating power of community, resourcefulness, and the kind of dedication that can keep the lights on, even in the darkest of times. So next time you light a candle, take a moment to appreciate the centuries of painstaking labor and the bureaucratic hurdles that have led to that flickering flame. And remember, in the grand scheme of things, it's always better to reuse than to lose. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. The history of candle wax reuse in medieval monasteries is a rather obscure yet fascinating topic. It intertwines the strictures of monastic life with the practical demands of resource management in an age where materials were scarce and every ounce of wax had to be accounted for. Welcome to a world where a flickering flame could spark a bureaucratic saga as convoluted as any medieval manuscript. ### Construction methods and materials, the wax of the land. In the early Middle Ages, specifically around the 6th century, monasteries began to emerge as centers of learning, agriculture, and, notably, candle production. The primary materials for these candles were beeswax and tallow. The latter, derived from animal fats, was more cost-effective. However, it had a tendency to smoke and emit a rather unpleasant odor, definitely not the ambience desired for prayer and contemplation. Construction methods *. 1. Beeswax extraction *. Monks would maintain beehives, carefully harvesting beeswax without harming the colonies. This was a delicate balance. A good beekeeper could produce high-quality wax that burned cleanly and brightly. 2. Tallow rendering *. Animal fat was boiled down in large cauldrons, creating a crude form of wax that was then poured into molds. The process was labor-intensive and required significant attention to avoid rancidity. 3. Mold crafting * Wax molds were often crafted from metal or clay, with some monasteries employing artisans skilled in metalwork. Molds could be reused, a practice that laid the groundwork for the future reuse policies. 4. Candle dipping * In a laborious process, monks would dip wicks into melted wax multiple times to build up layers, creating candles that could be quite substantial in size. It was during this phase that the question of wax reuse began to rear its head. ### Costs, the economics of light. By the 12th century, the demand for candles had risen sharply. The cost of materials was a significant concern, as beeswax was more expensive than tallow. A single pound of beeswax could cost as much as a week's worth of provisions for a monk. This led to the implementation of reuse policies that would dictate how wax could be salvaged and repurposed. 1. Cost of beeswax * 4 to 6 pence per pound, depending on local market conditions. 2. Cost of tallow * 1 to 2 pence per pound, a stark contrast, but the quality suffered. 3. Annual wax budget * Monasteries often operated on a budget of 10 to 20 shillings for wax, which required meticulous management. ## Hashtag bureaucratic rules and punishments, the waxen law. The 13th century saw the emergence of detailed bureaucratic regulations governing candle wax reuse. A council convened in 1235, known as the Council of the Waxmakers, established a series of edicts that would dictate how wax was to be managed. 1. Inventory control *. Monasteries were required to keep detailed inventories of their wax supplies. Each monk was assigned a quota, and failure to meet this quota could lead to severe repercussions. 2. Reuse policies * candles that had burned down to stubs could be collected and remelted. The new wax would be strained to remove impurities, ensuring quality. This policy was not just practical, it was viewed as a moral obligation to avoid waste. 3. Penalties for misuse *. First offense * a warning, accompanied by a public reprimand. Second offense * a week of fasting, no easy task for a man of the cloth. Third offense * a fine equivalent to a month's wages, an exorbitant sum, leading to many a monk's financial woes. Hashtag roles and job descriptions, the wax workforce. As the candle production process became increasingly bureaucratic, specific roles were established within the monastic community. Each monk had a part to play in ensuring the sanctity of wax management. 1. Wax master * the overseer of all candle production, responsible for inventory and quality control. A position of considerable prestige and responsibility, often held by a monk with a background in trade or economics. 2. Beekeepers * specialized monks tasked with maintaining the beehives. They often had to fend off not only the dangers of bee stings but also the allure of honey. After all, a good monk should avoid indulgence. 3. Tallow renderers * these monks were the backbone of the tallow production process, often working in less than pleasant conditions. They were known for their resilience and a knack for putting up with smells that would make even the most seasoned chef wince. 4. Candle dippers * a labor-intensive role involving the repetitive dipping of wicks in hot wax. These monks often bonded over their shared toil, exchanging tales of moral fortitude and the occasional wax mishap. 5. Wax auditors * appointed by the wax master, these monks ensured that all policies were followed. Their inspections could be rigorous, and they were known to wield their authority with a sense of grim humor, often stating, "A candle unaccounted for is a sin both in wax and soul." Hashtag technical specifications and inventories, the wax ledger. By the late 14th century, the meticulous record-keeping of candle production had reached its zenith. Monasteries maintained detailed inventories, often recorded in ledgers that would make modern accountants green with envy. Technical specs *. Standard candle size * typically 1 to 2 inches in diameter and 12 to 18 inches in height. Burn time * a beeswax candle could burn for up to 40 hours, while tallow candles averaged only 10 to 15 hours. Wax purity levels * monks developed a grading system from A to D, with A being pure beeswax and D being the lowest tallow quality. Sample inventory entries * 1. Beeswax, January 1345 50 pounds. Usage: 30 pounds for liturgical candles, 20 pounds set aside for special feasts. 2. Tallow, February 1345, 80 pounds. Usage: 60 pounds for everyday candles, 20 pounds reserved for emergencies. Witty asides, lighten the load. As the wax woes of monks escalated, so too did the humor surrounding these trials. One could imagine a monk lamenting, "If only I could trade my wax troubles for a barrel of mead." Alas, the wax must flow. Another might quip, why did the monk refuse to pay for new candles? Because he believed in the power of waxing poetic about reuse. Conclusion: the lasting legacy of wax policies. By the 15th century, the candle wax reuse policies in medieval monasteries had become a well-oiled machine. The balance of spiritual devotion and resource management had forged a unique legacy that would influence not just monastic life but also the broader economic landscape of Europe. The practices established during this period would echo throughout time, leading to innovations in candlemaking that we still recognize today. Who knew that the humble candle could illuminate such a dense bureaucracy? Perhaps the next time you light a candle, you'll remember the monks who toiled in the flickering shadows, ensuring that every drop of wax was cherished and accounted for. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, the tiresome history of monk candle wax reuse policies stands as a testament to human ingenuity, persistence, and, of course, a good sense of humor amidst the hardships of life. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies, a detailed dive. In the cloistered halls of medieval monasteries, where the scent of incense mingled with the faint whiff of candle wax, a peculiar economy thrived. This was not merely a matter of light or ambience, it was a meticulous system of reuse, recycling, and regulation. Candle wax, a precious commodity, underwent a life cycle that rivaled the most intricate of bureaucratic systems. This examination details the construction methods, materials, costs, bureaucratic rules, roles, and technical specifications that defined the reuse policies of candle wax among medieval monks. Buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy, waxy ride. Construction methods and materials. The art of candlemaking was a craft honed over centuries, with techniques evolving through trial and error. The primary materials used for candles included beeswax, tallow, rendered animal fat, and, less commonly, plant-based waxes. 1. Beeswax, highly sought after for its clean burn and pleasant aroma, beeswax candles were favored for liturgical purposes. However, they came with a hefty price tag, about 24 pennies per pound in the late 12th century, roughly equivalent to a day's wages for a laborer. 2. Tallow, more affordable but less desirable, tallow candles were often made from sheep or cow fat. The production process involved rendering fat and pouring it into molds. Not only did these candles emit an unpleasant odor, but they also produced soot, leaving a layer of grime on the monastery walls, a less than ideal ambience for prayer. 3. Plant-based waxes. Though rare, some monasteries experimented with plant-based waxes derived from sources like bayberries. However, These were often dismissed as a luxury for the affluent. The construction methods varied significantly based on the material. Beeswax candles were typically made by dipping wicks into molten wax, creating layers until the desired thickness was achieved. Tallow candles, on the other hand, were often molded, a process that involved pouring the rendered fat into a mold, allowing it to cool, and then removing the solidified candle. Costs and economic implications. The cost of candle production was a significant factor in the resource allocation of medieval monastic life. Monasteries operated under strict budgets, and every penny counted. Beeswax, at 24 pennies per pound, this was a luxury many monasteries could ill afford. Wealthier abbeys, such as those belonging to the Cistercian order, often maintained hives to supplement their supply. Tallow, costing around 4 pennies per pound, tallow was the go-to option for the less affluent monasteries. Some monks even resorted to scavenging for fat from local butchers to keep costs down. Labor costs. Crafting candles was labor-intensive, often requiring dedicated artisans. This led to the establishment of specific roles within the monastery, including the candle maker or candelarius, who was tasked with overseeing production and ensuring quality. In a period when even the wealthiest monasteries had to balance their books meticulously, the economic implications of wax reuse policies became increasingly critical. Bureaucratic rules and punishments. In the labyrinthine corridors of monastic governance, rules were as abundant as the candles that lit the way. The reuse policies for candle wax were no exception. These policies were formalized in various monastic codes, such as the Rule of Saint Benedict, circa 530 AD, and later adaptations by different orders. 1. Recycling mandates. Monks were required to collect and reuse leftover wax. This meant that any wax drippings from candles, instead of being discarded, were gathered, melted down, and reformed into new candles. 2. Inventory restrictions. A strict inventory system was enforced, wherein each monastery had to maintain detailed records of their wax stock. Failure to do so could lead to severe consequences. 3. Punishments. The penalties for non-compliance varied. A monk caught discarding usable wax could face a fine, be subjected to a period of fasting, or even receive a public reprimand during the daily prayers. In extreme cases, chronic offenders risked expulsion from the monastery. Talk about a sticky situation. 4. Audit procedures. Regular audits of the candle-making process were common, with a designated oversight committee that included the abbot and the candelarius. During these audits, monks would be required to demonstrate their candle-making proficiency, ensuring that no wax went to waste. These bureaucratic rules may seem excessive, but in a world where resources were scarce, and every ounce of wax counted, these measures were essential. Roles and job descriptions. The candle-making process was not a one-man show. It involved a small but dedicated team, each with specific roles. 1. Candelarius, candle maker. The head candle maker oversaw all aspects of production, from sourcing materials to managing inventory. This role required both skill and an eye for detail. 2. Assistants, often apprentices or junior monks. These individuals assisted in the actual candle-making process, from melting the wax to dipping wicks. They were also responsible for cleaning up any spills, an essential task, considering the slippery nature of tallow. 3. Inventory keeper. A designated monk was responsible for maintaining records of wax use and ensuring that all materials were accounted for. This position was critical in preventing wastage and ensuring compliance with monastic rules. 4. Oversight committee. Comprised of senior monks, this group was responsible for auditing the candle-making process and ensuring adherence to the reuse policies. They wielded significant power, and their decisions could impact the entire community. In the grand hierarchy of the monastery, the Candelarius often found themselves at the crossroads of spirituality and practicality. After all, nothing says holy light quite like a candle made from recycled wax. ### technical specs and inventories. The technical specifications for candles varied based on their intended use. The size, shape, and material composition were all dictated by the specific requirements of the monastic community. 1. Standard candle dimensions. Most beeswax candles were around 12 inches tall and 2 inches in diameter, while tallow candles varied in size. The height often depended on the intended burn time. Longer candles were typically used for longer services. 2. Wick specifications. The wicks were typically made from braided cotton or linen. The thickness of the wick was crucial. A wick too thin would extinguish prematurely, while one too thick would produce excessive smoke. 3. Burning time. A standard beeswax candle could burn for up to 40 hours, while a tallow candle typically lasted about 15 hours, good for a brief evening prayer but not much else. 4. Inventory management. Monasteries kept meticulous records of their wax supplies. A typical inventory list included the type of wax, beeswax versus tallow, the quantity in pounds, and the date of production. This helped in tracking the use of resources and ensuring that the reuse policies were being followed. 5. Quality control. The process of quality control was rigorous. Each batch of candles was tested for burn quality, scent, and appearance. If a candle performed poorly, it would be sent back for reprocessing, ensuring that only the best products were used in worship. #### The conclusion, a witty reflection. As we can see, the medieval monk candle wax reuse policies were a complex web of economics, bureaucracy, and spirituality. The dedication to reusing candle wax speaks to a broader ethos of resourcefulness that defined monastic life. After all, in a time when even the slightest flicker of light could be seen as divine intervention, every scrap of wax mattered. One might wonder if the monks ever discussed their recycling efforts during their evening prayers. Perhaps they'd recite, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, may our candles burn bright, and may we always recycle right." The next time you light a candle, whether it's beeswax or tallow, remember the medieval monks who toiled under flickering flames, ensuring that no wax went to waste. Their legacy is a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of a time when every resource was precious, and every light mattered. So, let there be light, and may it always be recycled. Hashtag the tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. Hashtag introduction, a flickering dilemma. In the dimly lit cloisters of medieval monasteries, a peculiar issue loomed larger than the flickering flames of the candles themselves: the reuse of candle wax. As the Middle Ages progressed from the 5th to the 15th century, the burgeoning demand for candles collided with limited resources, leading to an intricate web of construction methods, bureaucratic rules, and even job descriptions surrounding this seemingly trivial matter. Let us venture into the illuminating yet tiresome world of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. Hashtag construction methods and materials, from bees to tallow. The primary materials for candle making in medieval monasteries were beeswax and tallow, each with its unique properties and costs. Beeswax, harvested from hives tended by the monks themselves, was the luxurious choice, known for its clean burn and sweet aroma. However, it came at a steep price, about 3 pence per pound in the 12th century, a small fortune for most monastic budgets. In contrast, tallow, rendered from animal fat, was the more economical option. While it burned less brightly and produced a distinctly unpleasant odor, it was readily available and drastically cheaper, around 1 halfpenny per pound. The choice between the two materials often reflected the monastery's wealth and the significance of the occasion. For instance, festive celebrations warranted beeswax, while daily prayer sessions often relied on the humble tallow candle. Hashtag construction techniques. Monks employed various construction techniques to maximize the life of their candles. The most common method involved dipping. A wick would be repeatedly submerged in melted wax to build layers until the desired thickness was achieved. This method, while labor-intensive, allowed for the production of sturdy candles that could be reused after trimming. Some monasteries even experimented with molds, where molten wax was poured into carved wooden or metal shapes, yielding more uniform candles. However, these were often seen as a luxury, primarily reserved for special occasions or the higher echelons of monastic society. Hashtag bureaucratic rules and punishments. The Wax Enforcement Agency. The reuse of candle wax was not merely an economic decision, it was enshrined in the bureaucratic structures of the abbey. Monasteries operated under strict rules handed down by the church and local authorities, with the abbot often acting as the final arbiter of any disputes or infractions. Hashtag the Candle Reuse Code. By the 13th century, several monasteries had established formal policies regarding candle wax reuse. These rules often included: 1. Candle inspection. At the end of each week, monks were required to inspect their candles for potential reuse. Any candle that had burned down to a stub was to be saved and reformulated into new candles. 2. Documentation. A ledger was maintained, detailing the amount of wax saved and reused. This was often a source of pride, as it demonstrated the monastery's frugality and stewardship. 3. Penalties for waste. Monks caught discarding usable wax faced severe repercussions. Fines ranged from a few pence to an extra day of fasting, depending on the severity of the offense. In extreme cases, a monk could be relegated to the position of candle fetcher, a role not to be taken lightly and one often looked upon with disdain. ####### The role of the wax master. Within the monastic hierarchy, the wax master held a pivotal role, responsible for overseeing the candle-making process and ensuring adherence to reuse policies. This individual, often a skilled craftsman, was tasked with wax procurement, sourcing beeswax and tallow, often negotiating with local farmers or traders. Candle quality control, conducting inspections to ensure the candles met the monastery's standards of brightness and odor. Inventory management, maintaining records of both new and reused wax, providing reports to the abbot about candle production levels. The waxmaster's job was a blend of artistry and administration, akin to a modern-day project manager who also happens to have a knack for bee husbandry. ##### Roles and job descriptions, the monastic candle crew. In addition to the wax master, the candle-making process involved a variety of roles, each with specific responsibilities. 1. The wick maker. This monk specialized in crafting wicks from flax or cotton. A good wick was essential for a steady burn, and the wick maker often experimented with different thicknesses to find the perfect balance. 2. The melter. Tasked with rendering tallow and melting beeswax, the melter had to maintain the perfect temperature to prevent the wax from scorching. This role required keen attention, as burnt wax was not only unusable but could also lead to a rather smelly monastery. 3. The dipper. This monk was responsible for the actual construction of the candles. The dipper would dip the wick into the melted wax, counting the layers carefully. A mistake here could mean a candle that was either too flimsy or too thick to burn properly. 4. The inventory keeper. This individual was responsible for tracking the life cycle of each candle, from its creation to its eventual reuse. Often, this role was filled by a novice monk, as it required meticulous record-keeping skills. 5. The punisher. This unofficial role was often filled by the abbot or a senior monk who enforced the reuse policies with an iron fist. Monks knew that breaking the wax laws could lead to a rather uncomfortable evening of penance, or worse, a day spent fetching tallow from the pigsty. #### Technical specs and inventories, the Candle Chronicles. As candle production became more systematic, technical specifications and inventories emerged to standardize the process. By the 14th century, many monasteries had adopted a set of guidelines that dictated the dimensions and expected burn times for their candles. #### Standard candle sizes. 1. Small altar candle, approximately 3 inches in diameter, designed for daily masses. Expected burn time, 4 hours. 2. Medium vigil candle, about 6 inches in diameter, used for special ceremonies. Expected burn time, 12 hours. 3. Large feast candle, a hefty 9 inches in diameter, reserved for major feast days. Expected burn time, 24 hours. #### Inventory practices. Monastic inventories often included Current stock, a detailed account of wax available for use. Burned candles, records of candles that had been used and their respective wax content saved for reuse. Future needs, projections for upcoming services based on historical data. These detailed inventories not only ensured efficient use of resources but also reflected the monks' commitment to stewardship. One might say that the monks were the original recyclers, well before it became fashionable. ### The economics of candle reuse, a flickering financial strategy. The economic implications of candle wax reuse policies were profound. Monasteries operated on tight budgets, and every penny saved could be redirected toward other essential needs, such as feeding the poor or maintaining the abbey's infrastructure. By the late 14th century, it was estimated that a well-managed monastery could save up to 20% of its annual candle expenditure through effective reuse policies. This economic efficiency was celebrated in monastic circles, leading to a sort of candle economy, where surplus wax could be bartered or sold to neighboring villages, creating a new revenue stream. ### Witty asides, the light-hearted side of candle politics. Amidst the bureaucratic maze of wax policies, one can't help but chuckle at the sheer absurdity of some situations. For instance, there are tales of monks who, in a fit of frustration over a particularly stubborn wick, declared that a burnt candle is no better than a broken promise. Furthermore, one could imagine the lively debates held in the candlelit refectory, where the wax master argued passionately for beeswax's superiority over tallow, with his opponents retorting, "At least tallow won't leave you buzzing at night." ### Conclusion, a legacy of light. The history of candle wax reuse policies among medieval monks offers a fascinating glimpse into the intersection of economy, spirituality, and creativity. These policies were not merely about saving resources, they reflected a deeper commitment to sustainability, community, and the intricate balance of monastic life. As we dim the lights on this tiresome history, we find an enduring legacy of ingenuity. The humble candle, once a flickering light of devotion, became a symbol of resourcefulness and resilience. In the end, perhaps the most illuminating lesson from these medieval monks is that even the smallest of resources, like the remnants of a burnt candle, can be transformed into something worthwhile, guiding generations toward a brighter future. ### The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. The Middle Ages. A time of chivalry, plague, and a peculiar fascination with candle wax, specifically, the reuse of it. Yes, dear reader, while knights were off jousting and peasants were busy trying to figure out which way was up, medieval monks were engaged in a candle-related conundrum that would make even the most patient accountant tap their quill in frustration. Believe it or not, the history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies is a tapestry of regional variations, laws, taxes, and, dare I say, borderline grotesque anecdotes. ### Regional variations over time. If you thought the Middle Ages were all about a homogeneous culture of monks, think again. The world of candle wax reuse was as diverse as the number of ways to prepare a turnip in a 14th-century kitchen. In England, monks of the Benedictine order, with their penchant for austerity, had a strict policy regarding the reuse of candle wax. They would melt down the leftover bits from previous candle burnings to create new ones. It was recycling before it was cool, but with the monks' watery soup budget, every inch of wax counted. On the flip side, in the sunny climes of southern France, the Cistercians were more lenient. They had a knack for the luxurious, often favoring scented candles infused with herbs and oils. Here, wax reuse policies were less about frugality and more about maintaining a certain monastic ambience. Picture the monks in their ornate chapels, not just praying but basking in the sweet, fragrant glow of reused, and perhaps slightly dubious, candle wax. In both regions, however, one thing was crystal clear: the candle wax of yore was not just a source of light, it was a commodity. Monks traded it, taxed it, and, if the rumors are to be believed, occasionally engaged in candle wax turf wars. Yes, the candle business was cutthroat, and medieval monks were not above a bit of waxy rivalry. ##### laws, edicts, and taxes. Ah, the glorious world of medieval bureaucracy. When it came to candle wax, the monks were not just lighting their chapels with mere whims. No, they were bound by an intricate web of laws and edicts. The Church, in its infinite wisdom, decreed that all candles used in liturgical settings must meet certain specifications. This was not just a matter of aesthetic preference, it was about divine illumination. The wax had to come from pure sources. Beeswax, specifically, was the gold standard, and any hint of impurities might lead to a scandalous scandal. In England, the infamous candle tax, introduced in the late 13th century, further complicated matters. This tax was levied not just on the use of candles but also on the amount of wax consumed. Each monastery had to keep meticulous ledgers documenting their wax use, lest they find themselves facing the wrath of the local tax collector. One can only imagine the conversations that occurred over the dinner table. "Brother John, did you account for that half-burned candle that was left on the altar last Tuesday?" The Cistercians, with their penchant for scented candles, also faced their fair share of tax-related woes. They had to navigate a labyrinth of regulations to ensure that their fragrant creations met the standards of both the church and the local nobility. After all, nothing says noble piety like a whiff of lavender wafting through the air while you're deep in prayer. #### logistics and supply chains. Now, let's talk logistics, shall we? Transporting candle wax in the medieval era was no easy feat, unlike today's slick supply chains where you can have anything from avocado toast to artisanal candle wax delivered to your door with a single click. Medieval monks faced a series of logistical nightmares. The wax had to be sourced, melted, molded, and then, often, transported across perilous terrains. In many cases, monasteries relied on local beekeepers for their wax supply. This dependence meant navigating the often volatile relationships between monks and local farmers. One can only imagine the negotiations. "We'll take your wax, but only if you promise not to let your goats graze in our gardens again." Transporting the wax to the monasteries was another challenge. Monks often relied on packhorses, which were notorious for being as temperamental as a cat in a bath. Picture a group of earnest monks, robes billowing in the wind, chasing after a runaway horse that had decided it would rather eat the wax than carry it. Once the wax arrived at the monastery, the real fun began. Monks would gather in dimly lit rooms, armed with cauldrons and molds, ready to turn the remnants of their previous candle-making efforts into new sources of light. This led to a fascinating, and often chaotic, candle-making process where one could see the very essence of monastic life, patience, artistry, and the occasional wax fight. #### record keeping with lots of specifics. The meticulous record-keeping practices of medieval monks were legendary, akin to the obsessive nature of modern museum curators. Each monastery maintained ledgers that tracked their candle wax usage, purchases, and even the whims of the local tax collector. For instance, let us take a peek into the ledger of St. Augustine's monastery in Canterbury in the year 1285. There, you might find an entry that reads, "Purchased 10 pounds of beeswax from Brother Thomas of Kent for the purpose of liturgical candles." Note: ensure that last week's melted remains are included in our count to meet the candle tax requirements. This wasn't just about being thrifty, it was about survival. Monasteries that failed to keep accurate records risked not only financial penalties but also the wrath of their superiors. Imagine a monk being summoned to the abbey for a serious discussion about his candle wax accounting. The horror. The monks also had to keep track of which candles were used during specific liturgical events. This candle was lit during the feast of Saint Benedict, noted Brother Alaric, and thus must not be reused for the feast of Saint Augustine, lest we offend the saint. This meticulous record-keeping extended to the sourcing of wax, where monks were expected to document the purity of their materials, leading to a sort of medieval version of a quality assurance department. ###one surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. And now, dear reader, we arrive at the piece de resistance of our journey through the tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies, the borderline grotesque anecdote that will make you squirm in your seat. Legend has it that in 14th century France, a group of monks from a particularly austere abbey faced a dire shortage of wax. With the tax collectors breathing down their necks, the monks devised a rather unusual method of wax procurement. One fateful evening, they discovered that their neighbor's prized beehive had fallen into disrepair. Seizing the opportunity, the monks acquired the hive under the cover of darkness. However, the bees were not pleased with this turn of events. In a panic, the monks attempted to harvest the wax and honey, only to find themselves under siege by a swarm of furious bees. In a scene reminiscent of a slapstick comedy, the monks fled back to their abbey, arms flailing and yelping like a pack of startled deer, wax and honey spilling everywhere. And so, it was said, that the candle wax these monks later produced was not just infused with the essence of beeswax but also with the faintest aroma of desperation and panic. The resulting candles, while functional, bore the nickname, the Swarm of St. Buzz, and local villagers would often chuckle at the tale of the candle-making monks who had dared to mess with the bees. ###conclusion. So there you have it. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies is a saga filled with regional quirks, bureaucratic entanglements, logistical nightmares, and a great deal of record-keeping. It's a world where the humble candle was not just a source of light but a symbol of the trials and tribulations of monastic life. Next time you light a candle, spare a thought for the monks of yore, who navigated a world of wax with more red tape and drama than you might imagine. After all, in a world where the only thing brighter than the candle flame might just be the absurdity of its history, what's not to love? The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. In the dimly lit corners of medieval monasteries, where the air was thick with incense and the aroma of boiled cabbage, which, let's face it, wasn't much better than it sounds, a battle raged that went unnoticed by the general populace. Yes, while kings waged wars and peasants revolted over the price of bread, a far more insidious conflict simmered, that of the sacred wax. It was here, amidst the flickering glow of candlelight, that the monks faced a pressing dilemma: what to do with all that used candle wax. Because let's be honest, the life of a medieval monk wasn't just about prayer and piety, it was also about balancing the budget, and wax was a precious commodity. Regional variations over time, the wax wars. Across Europe, as the sun rose and set over the sprawling fields of wheat and the dank cloisters of stone, wax policies varied more than a peasant's opinion on the local lord. In England, for example, the Order of Saint Benedict encouraged a frugal approach to candle use, with monks often melting down used stubs to form new candles, a practice known as candle recycling. Why toss out a perfectly good piece of wax when you could create a new light source and save a few pence for the next ale run? Meanwhile, over in France, the Cistercians took a slightly different approach. They had a knack for legislation and, by the 12th century, established a comprehensive set of wax reuse policies. These included specific guidelines for the percentage of wax that could be reused versus what must be allocated for ceremonial purposes. Can you imagine the passionate debates in the cloisters? Brother, I propose we use 70% of last week's wax for the feast of Saint somebody. Surely, that's a holy cause. Ah, the joy of medieval bureaucracy. As the years rolled on, and the Renaissance approached, the wax wars only intensified. The Italians, ever the show-offs, began to experiment with colored wax, because when you're lighting up a chapel, why not do it in style? But this led to the creation of an entirely new problem. How do you blend the leftover hues without turning the next candle into a grotesque amalgamation of colors better suited for a jester's outfit than a holy sanctuary? The answer, my friends, was a closely guarded secret, perhaps even more so than the recipe for the finest mead. Laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers, the Wax Chronicles. With the rise of wax reuse policies came an avalanche of paperwork. The medieval monk's day wasn't just filled with prayers, it was also punctuated by the rhythmic scratching of quills against parchment, chronicling every bit of wax from the moment it was purchased to the moment it was melted down for reuse. The monks had to keep detailed ledgers of their wax inventory, akin to a modern-day accountant's nightmare. Ah yes, Brother Bernard, it appears we have 3.7 pounds of wax stubs remaining. Shall we allocate them for vespers or save them for the next candlelit feast? Laws were enacted, edicts proclaimed, and taxes levied, all in the name of wax. In the late 13th century, King Edward I of England decided that if wax was a commodity, it was ripe for taxation. He imposed a candle tax, requiring monasteries to pay a levy based on their candle production. This sent shockwaves through the monastic community. How dare they tax our divine light? Surely, God would not approve. As the monks scrambled to adapt to the new economic climate, ledgers became their lifeblood. Each entry meticulously recorded the date, weight, and type of wax used. The more frugal monks even invented a system of wax rationing, assigning each monk a daily allowance of wax based on their rank within the monastery. The abbot, of course, received a more generous portion, because who wouldn't want the head honcho basking in the warm glow of a newly minted candle? Logistics and supply chains, the wax trail. Now, if you think the monks were simply melting down their old candles like a bunch of novice crafters at a DIY retreat, you'd be mistaken. The logistics of wax supply chains rivaled those of the most complex medieval trade networks. The sourcing of beeswax, for instance, became an intricate affair. Monasteries would often maintain apiaries, hives of industrious bees buzzing about like tiny, winged accountants, ensuring their wax supply met the insatiable demand for illumination. The transportation of wax was no simple feat either. Imagine a group of monks trying to move wax from the countryside to the cloister. They'd load their carts with barrels of honeycomb and blocks of wax, navigating treacherous roads while fending off thieves who had a taste for sweet wax, and probably a few honey buns as well. It was a logistical ballet that required precision, teamwork, and the occasional chant to ward off ill fortune. The wax supply chain also prompted alliances and rivalries between monasteries. Brother, we must cut a deal with the Cistercians down the road. They have the finest beeswax this side of the Loire. And thus, negotiations would commence, complete with pacts sealed over goblets of watered-down wine. Record-keeping with lots of specifics, the wax ledger. Ah, the art of record-keeping, the monk's version of a modern-day Excel spreadsheet. Monasteries took their ledgers seriously. Each wax transaction was chronicled with the same fervor as a medieval knight recording his conquests. The monks would literally be up to their elbows in wax while they did it too. What a life! Ledgers contained specific categories: new wax purchases, reused wax entries, and tax deductions for wax utilization. Each entry came with an official stamp, often featuring the monastery's seal, which was forged in wax itself. The monks even devised a system of color coding: yellow for beeswax, blue for tallow, and a special red for emergency reserves. Imagine the abbot flipping through a ledger only to find a rogue entry marked in green. What fool dared to use colored wax in our sacred space? Moreover, the monks often calculated candle burn rates, meticulously noting how long each candle lasted during the evening prayers. This one burned for a solid 6 hours, a testament to our fine craftsmanship. They even had a rating system, awarding stars based on performance. Ah yes, Brother Thomas, your candles are rated a solid 4 stars this week. Excellent. A surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote, the inauspicious wax incident. And now, dear readers, we arrive at the piece de resistance of our waxy tale, a story so grotesque it could make even the sturdiest of stomachs churn. It was a fateful winter's night in 14th century England when a group of monks decided to host a grand feast to celebrate the end of the harvest. They lit their finest candles, crafted from the best wax, and prepared a banquet that would make even Henry VIII green with envy. But as the evening wore on and the ale flowed like a river, the monks grew increasingly careless. In a moment of poor judgment, fueled by a touch too much mead, they decided to reuse some of the previous year's candles, ones that had been stored in a less than ideal condition. Unbeknownst to them, these candles had absorbed the lingering scents of months of mealtime prayers, the faint whiffs of rotting cabbage, and, dare I say it, the aroma of fermented cheese. As the candles burned, the aroma wafted through the hall, mingling with the rich scents of roasted meats and spiced pies. Guests were initially charmed, thinking it a new culinary trend. Ah, the monks surely have a unique approach to ambience. But as the evening wore on, horror struck. The candles began to drip not just wax, but a noxious concoction of old food odors, sending the guests into a frenzy. Is that last year's stew?" one brave soul dared to inquire, while another fainted at the table. The celebration turned into a scene straight out of a farcical play, with monks scrambling to extinguish the candles while the guests fled the hall, clutching their noses in despair. And so, dear reader, the tale of candle wax reuse in the medieval period reminds us that even in the hallowed halls of the monastery, absurdity can strike with the ferocity of a poorly melted candle. The next time you enjoy the warm glow of a candle, spare a thought for those tireless monks, who fought the good fight against wax waste, one flickering flame at a time. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. Ah, medieval monks, the unsung heroes of candlelit devotion and the original recyclers. While history often romanticizes their pious lives dedicated to prayer, manuscript illumination, and the occasional bout of quiet existential dread, it overlooks one of their lesser-known but endlessly fascinating pursuits, the astute management of candle wax. Yes, dear reader, let's dive into the gloppy, drippy world of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies, where fiscal prudence met ecclesiastical fervor in a dance of sticky fingers and flickering flames. #### regional variations over time. To fully appreciate the candle wax conundrum of our devoted monks, we must first acknowledge the delightful patchwork of regional variations. Picture this: a candle-sporting monk in a Benedictine abbey in France, meticulously crafting candles from leftover wax drippings, while a Cistercian in England tosses his wax scraps into the communal cauldron, muttering about the inefficiencies of his French counterparts. In the colder climes of Scandinavia, where the long, dark winters prompted a veritable race for illumination, monks took a more pragmatic approach. They employed a method known as candle re-rendering, where leftover wax was melted down, strained, and remolded into new shapes, often adorned with curious designs that could only be described as avant-garde by modern standards. Meanwhile, down in sunny Italy, monks were less concerned with pragmatism and more with aesthetics, using a mixture of beeswax and tallow to create candles that doubled as a status symbol. You could say that in the candle game, the Italians were the divas, while the Scandinavians were the down-to-earth pragmatists. This regional flair extended beyond mere wax composition. In some areas, monks developed strict guidelines for candle reuse policies. For instance, in the shadowy abbeys of Germany, the liturgical calendar dictated wax usage, more candles for feasts, fewer for fasting. Conversely, in Portugal, where the sun shone a bit brighter, the wax was treated with a laissez-faire attitude that often led to a surplus of half-burnt candles being melted down at the end of the year, creating a candle recycling festival that, while beloved, left the abbey smelling like a mix of burnt offerings and regret. ##### laws, edicts, taxes, ledgers. Not to be outdone by their artistic flair, the monks also had a penchant for bureaucratic rigor that would make any modern accountant swoon. Candle wax reuse policies were often codified in local laws and edicts, making the humble candle a subject of serious governance. In 1235, for example, the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland issued a decree stating that all used candle stubs must be recorded in the abbey's ledger, with meticulous attention to detail. This decree was likely not born from an obsession with cleanliness but rather from the fear of divine retribution for wastefulness. And let's not forget the taxes. Oh yes, the medieval church loved its taxes as much as it loved a good hymn. The tithe of the wax was a real thing, where a portion of the wax produced was given to the church. Monks were required to keep detailed records of their candle-making activities, and any deviations from the prescribed quantities could result in stern reprimands and perhaps even a few extra hours kneeling on cold stone floors in penance. These ledgers were not mere bureaucratic paperwork, they served as a historical treasure trove. Imagine flipping through dusty tomes filled with entries like, 10 pounds, of wax rendered on Saint Benedict's feast day, or 3.5 candles melted due to excessive flickering during Vespers. These records provide a glimpse into the candle economy of the time, revealing not just the number of candles but also the types of wax used, the occasions for which they were burned, and the inevitable drips that went unaccounted for, an entire ecosystem of light and shadow captured in ink. #### logistics and supply chains. As any modern entrepreneur will tell you, a good candle business relies on logistics. Monks, with their sandal-clad feet and self-sufficient lifestyles, were surprisingly adept at managing supply chains. The wax didn't just materialize out of thin air, it was procured from various sources, including local beekeepers and tallow rendering operations. In regions with abundant bee populations, such as those charming hills of Provence, monks would barter with beekeepers for high-quality beeswax, swapping manuscripts and prayers for that sweet, sweet golden substance. In less bee-friendly areas, like the rocky outcrops of Scotland, monks had to get creative, utilizing animal fats from local farms. The end result? A candle that burned bright but smelled like a rustic stew gone wrong. Transporting the raw materials was no small feat either. Monks employed a network of donkey caravans and riverboats to move their wax supplies from the countryside into their candle-making workshops. The logistics of wax procurement involved not just planning, but also an understanding of seasonality. Beeswax was most plentiful in late summer, while tallow was a more year-round affair, albeit a less fragrant one. These logistics were often laid out in painstaking detail in the monks' ledgers, where one might find entries like 20 pounds of beeswax transported via 3 donkeys from the valley of Vaucluse on the 14th of August. When the supply chain ran smoothly, it was a cause for celebration; when it didn't, it was a recipe for a very dark chapel indeed. #### record keeping with lots of specifics. Now, one might think that all this candle wax talk is a bit, well, drippy, but the truth is that medieval monks were masters of record keeping. Their ledgers were not just for keeping track of wax, they included detailed accounts of everything from the thickness of the wax to the burn time of each candle. For instance, they meticulously noted that a standard beeswax candle burned for approximately 12 hours while a tallow candle lasted only about 4 to 6 hours, assuming no rogue drafts or overly enthusiastic altar boys were involved. They had detailed charts showing how many candles were used per service, and even calculated the average number of flickers per hour, a metric now known as the flicker index. One particularly amusing entry from the Abbey of Cluny in 1092 reads, "Candle number 34 melted at a rate of 0.25 inches per hour, leading to a liturgical emergency during the Easter Vigil." Such records, while humorous to us today, were serious business for the monks, who understood that a well-lit chapel led to a well-lit soul. ###One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, allow me to regale you with a rather surprising anecdote that veers into the grotesque. Picture this: it's the year 1185, and the monks of a certain abbey in England are preparing for a grand feast to celebrate the arrival of a new abbot. Candles are central to the festivities, and the monks are keen to ensure everything is perfect, including the lighting. In the lead-up to the event, one overly zealous monk took it upon himself to ensure that no wax went to waste. So, in a fit of candle madness, he began collecting all the leftover wax from various services, even the wax that had dripped onto the floor, yes, even that. The day of the feast arrived, and the monks proudly displayed their glorious, albeit questionable, candle creations. However, as the evening wore on, a foul smell began to waft through the abbey. Guests were horrified to discover that the source of the stench was none other than the special candles crafted from the wax drippings of not only previous services but also the remnants of the monastic kitchen, rendered fat, scraps of meat, and who knows what else had made its way into the mix. As the candles burned, they released a smoky aroma reminiscent of damp socks and overcooked cabbage, leaving the monks frantically waving their hands in front of their faces while trying to maintain an air of solemnity. The story of the Feast of the Stinky Candles became a cautionary tale among monks, emphasizing the importance of proper candle wax sourcing and the perils of an overly ambitious recycling initiative. ###Conclusion. And there you have it, an exploration into the tiresome yet fascinating history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. From regional variations to the minutiae of record-keeping, these pious candle aficionados were not only lighting the way for their spiritual journeys but also navigating the complexities of logistics, taxes, and the occasional aromatic disaster. So, the next time you light a candle, spare a thought for those devoted monks of yore. They may have been draped in brown robes and cloaked in solemnity, but they certainly knew how to keep the candle flame flickering, often with a side of grotesque humor. After all, in the grand tapestry of history, even the most mundane topics can illuminate the quirkiest corners of our past. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. Ah, the medieval period. A time of chivalry, plague, and, let's not forget, the humble candle. Before we dive into the depths of waxy bureaucracy, let's consider the candle's significance in the dimly lit halls of monasteries. Picture it, a cloistered monk, draped in a habit, peering into the flickering flame of a candle as if it held the secrets of the universe. Spoiler alert, it mostly held the secrets of a rather tiresome set of wax reuse policies. ##### regional variations over time. Now, let's set the stage with our first act, the regional variations of candle use and wax policies. The medieval world was, as you might expect, a patchwork of customs and regulations. In England, the Cistercian monks had a rather cavalier attitude towards wax reuse. They viewed it as a noble endeavor, a form of piety, if you will. "Thou shalt not waste wax," was practically their motto. They were the eco-warriors of their time, making sure that every last drip of wax was salvaged and repurposed. Meanwhile, in France, the Benedictines were slightly less enthusiastic about the whole recycling concept. The French had a penchant for extravagance, which translated into a plethora of ornate candles, often made from beeswax, quite the luxury item in a world where the average peasant was more familiar with the smell of unwashed sheep than the sweet aroma of honeycomb. The French monks were known to hoard their wax, hoarding it like a dragon with its gold. This led to fierce debates in the cloister about whether it was better to burn a lavish candle for a feast day or to save it for a rainy day, which, in medieval terms, could mean anything from a blizzard to the arrival of the bubonic plague. ##### laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. Enter the realm of laws and edicts regulating wax. Because what's a good candle without a bit of bureaucracy? In the 12th century, King John of England decreed that all wax produced by monasteries must be documented meticulously. This resulted in a fascinating game of ledger-keeping that would make modern accountants weep with jealousy. Monks were required to record the weight of wax used in candles, the number of candles produced, and the number of candles that met a premature end due to overzealous prayers or errant gusts of wind. The records were kept in large tomes, often referred to as the Great Wax Ledger, not to be confused with the Beatles, the White Album, though both had equal amounts of drama. One particularly industrious monk, Brother Oswald, became famous for his extravagant notations. He would include detailed descriptions of how many candles were lit during Vespers, complete with footnotes about the theological implications of their illumination. 1 candle for every saint, unless it's Tuesday, in which case, 2 for Saint Anthony. And if it's a leap year, throw in a 3rd just for good measure. Taxation on wax was also a thriving source of income for local lords. In 1207, the wax tax was introduced, which mandated that all monasteries pay a tithe on their wax production. The monks had to balance their piety with their financial obligations, leading to clandestine candle-making operations in the backrooms of the abbey. This was not unlike the Prohibition era in the United States, but instead of speakeasies, you had candleries. Logistics and supply chains. Logistics. The unsung hero of wax reuse policies. Imagine a medieval monk trying to strategize the wax supply chain. It was a Herculean task, especially when you factor in the transportation of beeswax from local beekeepers. The monastic community relied on a network of farmers, who would trade honey for wax, leading to a barter system that would make any modern economist's head spin. The logistics of candle production often involved elaborate planning sessions, featuring maps of bee locations, wax yield estimates, and, of course, a detailed analysis of how many bees were needed to sustain a steady supply of wax. Some monks even ventured into the art of beekeeping, resulting in a delightful side business that saw them become not only candle producers but also local honey suppliers. This led to the curious phrase, "A candle a day keeps the bees at play," which, while not historically accurate, definitely has a ring to it. Record keeping with lots of specifics. Now, let's delve deeper into the specifics of record keeping. The monks were meticulous, and I mean meticulous. They created a whole taxonomy of wax records. There were standard candle logs, exceptional candle events, and even candle catastrophe reports. The latter were particularly entertaining, as they documented the unfortunate incidents of candles that met their end in less than glorious ways. One such report from 1324 details the infamous candle catastrophe of St. Augustine's Day. It involved a particularly ambitious candle that was supposed to burn for 48 hours straight during a religious vigil. Unfortunately, a gust of wind blew through the chapel, causing pandemonium. Approximately 15 monks were singed in the ensuing chaos, the report stated, but we were able to salvage 3/4 of the wax. Priorities, people. The monks even created a system of color coding for their wax records. White wax for regular candles, yellow for special occasions, and green for emergency candles, which were stored in a secret location and only used in the direst of situations, like if the bishop showed up unannounced or if the monastery ran out of wine during a feast. A surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. And now, for the piece de resistance, the borderline grotesque anecdote that will leave you questioning your very existence. In the late 14th century, a particularly enterprising monk named Brother Gerald decided to take wax reuse to the next level. Tired of the constant drudgery of record keeping and wax melting, he came up with a rather unique solution to the wax shortage problem. During a particularly harsh winter, when bees were not producing and the wax supply was running low, Brother Gerald concocted a plan that involved using the fat rendered from deceased monastery cats. Yes, you read that correctly. He called it feline fuel, and it was a hit among the more desperate monks who were willing to light anything that would stay lit. The feline fuel candles were, unsurprisingly, not well received by the community at large. Rumors began to spread that the candles emitted a peculiar odor, reminiscent of burnt fur and regret. One ill-fated Vespers service saw the congregation bathed in an unholy light, and the monks were left questioning their choices as the smell of feline fuel wafted through the air. In his defense, Brother Gerald kept meticulous records of his endeavor, detailing the number of cats rendered into candles, the burn time of each feline fuel candle, and, of course, the reactions of the parishioners. Less than ideal, he noted in his ledger, but at least we're not in complete darkness. Conclusion. So, there you have it, the tiresome yet oddly fascinating history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. From the regional variations in wax production and the myriad of laws governing it, to the logistics of supply chains and the surprisingly intricate record-keeping, the candle was more than just a source of light, it was a central pillar of monastic life. And who could forget Brother Gerald's foray into the realm of feline fuel, a testament to human creativity in the face of scarcity. Next time you light a candle, take a moment to ponder the rich, waxy history behind it. Just remember, it could have been worse. You could have been burning a feline fuel candle. Now that's a thought that will keep you up at night. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. Ah, the medieval monk, a figure celebrated for piety, scholarly pursuits, and a rather peculiar relationship with candle wax. If you think of monks as serene beings chanting in dimly lit abbeys, you're not wrong, but you're missing the riveting drama of their candle-related policies. Yes, dear reader, we're diving deep into the surprisingly convoluted and hilariously tedious world of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. Buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy ride through time, place, and the occasional waxy horror. Regional variations over time. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, one would assume candle wax reuse policies were as uniform as a monk's habit. But, oh, how wrong you would be. These policies varied not only by region but also by the whims of local abbots and the ever-shifting tides of monastic fashion. In the hallowed halls of the Benedictine monasteries, for instance, we find a particularly frugal approach. The monks of Cluny were known for their thriftiness, believing that every drop of wax was a precious offering to the Lord. Meanwhile, in the more flamboyant Cistercian houses, where the monks occasionally fancied themselves artists as well as ascetics, the reuse of wax was often dictated by aesthetic rather than fiscal considerations. They would happily melt down leftover candles, reforming them into new shapes, think candle sculptures of saints, which were likely to inspire both devotion and envy among their fellow monks. And let's not even get started on the Franciscans. These free-spirited monks often had a more laissez-faire approach to their candle management, sometimes leaving wax drippings where they fell, creating a veritable wax museum of their spiritual journey. Apparently, the divine light of God was best illuminated by the charming chaos of their candle mishaps. Laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. As you might imagine, the use and reuse of candle wax did not go unchecked. No. The medieval world was rife with laws and edicts, often written in the most tedious of scripts, and accompanied by a delightful variety of taxes. One such example comes from the reign of Henry III of England, who, in a moment of sheer bureaucratic brilliance, instituted the candle tax of 1251. This tax applied to all liturgical candles used in churches, and the reigning monks had to keep meticulous records of their wax consumption. Imagine the joy of those monks as they meticulously logged every inch of wax they burned, no doubt with quills that were more ink-stained than the average monk's conscience. The ledgers of various monasteries reveal a labyrinthine web of calculations: how many candles were burned during Mass, how many were reused, and how much wax was left over. The monks were practically accountants in habits, with a penchant for double-entry bookkeeping that would make modern auditors weep with envy. In stark contrast, some monasteries opted to ignore these bureaucratic nightmares altogether. The monks of St. Augustine's Abbey in Canterbury famously threw caution to the wind and simply lit their candles without a care for tax implications. Their motto: "Let the light shine, the taxman can go to hell." This cavalier attitude, while endearing, often landed them in hot water with local authorities, leading to delightful tussles over overdue wax taxes. ##### Logistics and supply chains. Now, let's talk logistics and supply chains because, believe it or not, the medieval candle industry was nothing short of a logistical marvel. The sourcing of wax was an elaborate affair involving beekeepers, candle makers, and monks who were both suppliers and consumers of their own light. Beeswax, the crème de la crème of candle materials, was often imported from as far away as the Middle East. Monasteries would engage in a complex bartering system, trading surplus honey for wax and vice versa. But the logistics didn't stop there. Once the wax was procured, the monks had to figure out how to get it into candle form. Enter the humble candle maker, a man or woman of great skill whose workshop was a veritable wonderland of wax, wicks, and a few too many bees. The candle-making process itself was often communal, with monks gathering around a cauldron, melting down old candles, and sharing gossip while trying not to burn their eyebrows off. Once the candles were formed, they had to be transported to the abbey's chapel, a journey fraught with peril. Imagine a monk, balancing a precarious stack of delicate candles while dodging an inquisitive goat or a particularly stubborn mule. The horror of a broken candle, a tragedy that echoed through the abbey like a medieval opera of despair. ##### record keeping with lots of specifics. And speaking of record keeping, let's dive into the specifics of how these monks documented their wax-related endeavors. The meticulous record-keeping practices of the medieval monastic community were nothing short of legendary, not to mention a bit tedious to the uninitiated. Monasteries maintained extensive ledgers that catalogued everything from candle production to reuse policies. One particularly amusing entry from the ledger of the Abbey of St. Peter in Ghent details an entire year's worth of candle use. For the year 1175, they recorded burning 1,245 candles during Vespers, 672 during Matins, and a staggering 3,456 for various feast days. The monks even had a whimsical system of notations: each time a candle was reused, a little doodle of a bee was drawn next to the entry. In another document, a monk named Brother Alcuin, who fancied himself a bit of a poet, penned a rather lengthy ode to the joys of candle reuse. He wrote, "O waxen light, thou art my guiding star, in prayerful hours, I'll not let you stray far, if melted once, thou shalt rise anew, a phoenix of wax, in service true." This was, of course, before he was reprimanded for being too poetic during his ledger duties. One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. But the piece de resistance of our waxy tale comes courtesy of a rather grotesque anecdote involving candle reuse that would make even the most hardened historian cringe. As the legend goes, there was a certain monastery in Brittany known for its particularly frugal practices. The monks, desperate to save every last bit of wax, had a system in place for collecting the leftover wax drippings from their candle holders. One fateful winter, the monks were faced with an extreme shortage of candles. The abbot, in a moment of sheer desperation, decided to hold a candlelit feast to celebrate the feast of Saint Roch, a saint known for his miraculous healing powers. The monks were instructed to bring forth their most cherished candles for melting down. As the feast progressed, a monk named Brother Edgar, who had a penchant for excessive revelry, accidentally knocked over a bowl of wax drippings collected from the previous year's festivities. The wax mixed with food remnants, and before anyone knew it, the once festive affair had turned into a scene reminiscent of a medieval horror film. The monks, caught in the throes of gluttony, began to consume the wax-laden food, believing it to be a sign of divine favor. The following morning, the abbey was in chaos. Instead of a heavenly glow, there was a rather unholy smell wafting through the corridors, and Brother Edgar was found in a particularly unfortunate state, forever known as the Candle Monk. Thus, the lesson was learned: while candle wax reuse may have been a noble pursuit, one must always be cautious about where the wax ends up, especially when it comes to food. Conclusion. So there you have it, the tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies, a saga filled with regional variations, bureaucratic headaches, logistical nightmares, and one rather grotesque anecdote that will haunt your dreams. Who knew that the humble candle could illuminate such a tangled web of history? As you venture forth, remember to appreciate the light, both the literal and the metaphorical. And if you ever find yourself in a medieval abbey, perhaps think twice before indulging in the feast. You never know what kind of waxy surprises await. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. It is often said that the history of civilization can be traced through the flickering light of candle flames. This assertion rings especially true when we delve into the obscure yet fascinating world of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. Within the austere walls of monasteries, where every ounce of resource was meticulously accounted for, the practice of reusing candle wax became not only a necessity but also a reflection of the monk's spiritual and economic ethos. This exploration will reveal the minor figures and petty rules that governed wax reuse, present case studies that illuminate these practices, compare them to different regions, unearth archaeological tidbits, and ultimately pose questions that compel us to consider the larger implications of such seemingly trivial policies. Minor figures and petty rules. In the grand tapestry of medieval history, it is easy to overlook the minor figures who played crucial roles in the day-to-day operations of monastic life. Among these figures were the candlemasters, or lucernarii, tasked with overseeing the production and maintenance of candles. These men were often low-ranking monks, yet their authority was significant in the context of resource management. The candlemasters were responsible for enforcing several petty rules surrounding candle wax reuse. For instance, in the Abbey of Cluny in Burgundy, a specific regulation dictated that any wax remnant should not exceed 2 inches in length before being melted down for reuse. This seemingly trivial measurement highlights the meticulous attention to detail that characterized monastic life. Another petty rule was the segregation of wax types. In the monastic community of St. Gall around 850 AD, a decree was issued mandating that beeswax candles could only be reused for ceremonial purposes, while tallow candles, made from animal fat, were reserved for utilitarian use. This distinction not only reflected the monastic values of purity and piety but also showcased an understanding of the different qualities of light produced by various waxes. Such regulations reveal a complex hierarchy of value attributed to different types of wax, further underscoring the monk's commitment to austerity and utility. Case studies with dates and lists. To illuminate the practical applications of these reuse policies, let us examine a few notable case studies from different monasteries across Europe. 1. The Abbey of Cluny, 910 AD. Cluny, one of the most influential monastic centers of the Middle Ages, introduced a rigorous candle wax management system. A ledger from this period records that the abbey produced approximately 1,500 candles each year. Of these, 600 were earmarked for liturgical purposes, while the remaining 900 were reserved for everyday use. The wax from candles that had burned down to less than half their original height was systematically collected, remelted, and poured into molds for new candles. This meticulous record-keeping not only illustrates the scale of candle use but also the commitment to sustainability in a religious context. 2. The Monastery of St. Gall, 9th century. The famed monastery in Switzerland had a detailed inventory of candle production from 820 to 850 AD. The monks recorded that they used about 200 pounds of beeswax annually, with a reuse rate of approximately 30%. The wax from used candles was combined with fresh wax in a specific ratio, ensuring that the integrity of the new candles was maintained. The monks even noted the color variations in the candles produced from reused wax, with some preferring the golden hue of well-aged wax for religious ceremonies. 3. Durham Cathedral, 11th century. In England, Durham Cathedral's records from the late 11th century reveal an intriguing case of candle reuse policy enforcement. During the annual assessment of resources, the prior of the monastery reported that 120 pounds of tallow was recovered from the previous year's candle stubs. The wax was then repurposed to create smaller votive candles for the laity. This practice not only served the monastery's economic interests but also strengthened community ties, as it allowed the monks to share their resources with parishioners. Comparisons to other regions. The candle wax reuse policies of medieval monks were not uniform across Europe. Different regions showcased their unique approaches rooted in local customs and economic realities. For instance, in the Iberian Peninsula, the use of olive oil lamps was prevalent, and candle wax reuse was less emphasized. Spanish and Portuguese monasteries focused more on the cultivation of olives and the production of oil for lighting, which was cheaper and more abundant than wax. This difference in lighting practices reflects the climatic and agricultural conditions of the region, as well as the economic priorities of the local monastic communities. In contrast, Scandinavian monasteries, particularly those in Norway, relied heavily on tallow candles due to the scarcity of beeswax. The reuse of candle remnants was less formalized. Instead, it was a matter of practicality. Monks in these regions often melted down the remnants for cooking or even for the production of soap, illustrating a more utilitarian approach to resource management. This reflects the harsh living conditions and the need for every resource, including candle wax, to be maximally exploited. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological finds have provided fascinating insights into medieval candle wax reuse practices. In excavations at the Abbey of Glastonbury in England, remnants of candle molds dating back to the 8th century were unearthed, along with traces of reused wax. Chemical analyses revealed that a significant portion of the wax contained additives, suggesting that monks were experimenting with different materials to enhance the burning properties of their candles. This discovery indicates not only a resourcefulness but also a pursuit of quality in their lighting practices. Moreover, the remains of candle stubs found in the ruins of the monastery at Jarrow, known for its association with the Venerable Bede, revealed a high incidence of reused wax. The stubs were analyzed, and it was discovered that many contained traces of herbs, indicating that some monks may have infused their candles with fragrances for use during religious ceremonies. This practice adds a layer of sensory experience to the understanding of monastic life, as the flicker of candlelight was accompanied by aromatic offerings that enhanced the spiritual atmosphere. Rhetorical questions to hook curiosity. What might the candles of the past reveal about the values and priorities of those who lit them? How does the seemingly mundane practice of reusing candle wax reflect broader themes of sustainability and resourcefulness in a time when every scrap mattered? As we reflect on the medieval monks' reuse policies, we uncover a narrative that transcends mere frugality. The careful management of candle wax serves as a lens through which we can examine the intricate balance between spiritual devotion and practical necessity. The monastic commitment to sustainability through resource reuse speaks to a broader human experience, the tension between abundance and scarcity, the sacred and the mundane. In a world increasingly aware of its environmental impact, the medieval practice of candle wax reuse invites us to reconsider our own relationship with resources. The flickering flames that once illuminated the cloisters of monasteries now serve as a reminder of the enduring human struggle for balance and the creative solutions that arise when circumstances demand it. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies is not just a tale of minor figures and petty rules, it is a reflection of the human spirit's resilience in the face of adversity, an echo of our past that continues to resonate in the present. Hashtag the tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. The history of candle wax reuse policies among medieval monks is a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of monastic life. While the grand narratives of medieval cathedrals, illuminated manuscripts, and theological debates capture our attention, the seemingly mundane details of candle wax management reveal a world of minor figures, petty rules, and unexpected complexities. This exploration goes beyond mere documentation of practices. It delves into the nuanced relationships between economy, spirituality, and community within monastic orders. Hashtag minor figures and petty rules. In the cloistered world of medieval monasteries, where every action was imbued with spiritual significance, the management of candle wax became a microcosm of the larger religious life. Each monastic community, from the austere Cistercians to the opulent Benedictines, developed its own set of regulations governing the use and reuse of candle wax. The minor figures responsible for these rules often went unrecognized in the grand chronicles of history, yet their influence on monastic life was profound. Take, for instance, Brother Hubert of the Abbey of St. Gall in the early 11th century. He was not a monk of great renown, but he was tasked with overseeing the candle-making process. He instituted a strict policy that required the monks to return any unused wax from their personal candles to the common store. This policy was seen as a way to promote austerity and communal sharing, but it also sparked resentment among monks who felt their personal piety was being compromised. The result was a silent rebellion, with monks hiding bits of wax in their tunics to avoid returning it to the communal pot. In the same vein, the rule of Saint Benedict, which governed many monastic communities, included a specific mention of how candles should be treated. It stated that, the light is to be shared, but the wax is to be cherished. This seemingly innocuous phrase led to various interpretations, with some monks arguing that it justified the hoarding of wax for personal use, while others insisted on strict adherence to communal sharing. Hashtag case studies with dates and lists. 1. The Abbey of St. Gall, circa 1000 AD, as mentioned previously, Brother Hubert's policies were not isolated incidents. In the records of the Abbey of St. Gall, a list from 1025 AD details the quantity of wax used each month, alongside the names of monks who contributed to the communal fund. Notably, the month of January saw a spike in wax consumption due to the Feast of the Epiphany, illustrating the direct correlation between religious observance and candle use. 2. The Cistercian Monastery of Fontenay, circa 1140 AD, a slightly more liberal approach to wax reuse was adopted here. A surviving document from 1140 indicates that each monk was permitted to keep a small portion of wax from communal candles for personal use, provided they maintained a ledger of their consumption. This practice, however, led to disputes over the accuracy of the ledgers, with certain monks accused of inflating their recorded usage to justify hoarding. 3. The Abbey of Cluny, circa 1100 AD, Cluny was known for its wealth, yet even here, austerity prevailed in the matter of candle wax. An entry from the Abbey's financial records indicates that 200 pounds of wax were purchased annually, and an additional 50 pounds were reclaimed from the remnants of burned candles. This practice not only saved money but also served as a testament to their commitment to the principle of frugality in a world rife with excess. 4. The monastery of St. Augustine in Canterbury, circa 1200 AD. Here, wax reuse policies were tightly regulated, with an instance recorded in 1203 where a monk named Brother Edric was reprimanded for his failure to return leftover wax. The monks voted to impose a fine of 2 denarii on him, which was to be donated to the local poor. This case highlights how the reuse policies were intertwined with broader social responsibilities. ##### comparisons to other regions. The policies surrounding candle wax reuse were not uniform across Europe. In regions such as Scandinavia, where wood was abundant, many communities relied on oil lamps instead of candles. The Norse monks of the 12th century would often use fish blubber for lighting, a practice that, while effective, lacked the communal aspect of wax reuse policies found in other parts of Europe. They had their own peculiarities. Some monasteries even burned the fat of their deceased members as a means of honoring the dead, a practice that raised eyebrows and sparked debates among the more orthodox monastic communities. In contrast, in the Byzantine Empire, the use of candles was often linked with elaborate liturgical ceremonies. The Eastern Orthodox monks had a different approach to wax management, where the grandeur of the candle outweighed the need for frugality. The lavishness of the candles used during the Divine Liturgy stands in stark contrast to the austere practices of their Western counterparts. Here, wax was often considered a gift from God and not merely a resource to be conserved. ####archaeological tidbits. Archaeological discoveries have shed light on the practical aspects of candle wax reuse policies. In the ruins of the Abbey of St. Gall, researchers uncovered remnants of candle stubs and fragments of wax molds used for casting candles. Chemical analysis of these remnants revealed that beeswax was the primary material, corroborating historical accounts of its use in monastic settings. Additionally, at the Cistercian monastery of Fontenay, excavations unearthed a cache of wax remnants along with a slate tablet inscribed with the names of the monks and their respective wax contributions. The tablet, dating back to 1150, serves as a remarkable example of how wax management was not merely a practical concern but also a matter of record-keeping and accountability. Interestingly, in some regions, archaeologists have found votive candles in burial sites, suggesting that the practice of candle burning transcended the walls of monasteries. This raises an intriguing question. Did the monks' stringent reuse policies influence the practices of the laity, or were they a reflection of broader societal attitudes towards resource conservation? ##### rhetorical questions to hook curiosity. What drove pious monks to hoard wax in secret, even when their very lives were dedicated to communal sharing and humility? Could the pious act of candle burning reveal the hidden tensions between personal spirituality and communal obligation that define the very fabric of monastic life? ####conclusion. The history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies is a tapestry woven with threads of piety, economy, and community. The minor figures who implemented these policies, often lost to the annals of history, played crucial roles in shaping the everyday lives of monks. Through case studies and comparisons across regions, we see how the seemingly mundane practice of wax reuse encapsulated larger themes of austerity, accountability, and the struggle between individual desires and communal responsibilities. As we reflect on these historical details, we are reminded that the lives of medieval monks were rich with complexities that resonate even today. The reuse of candle wax, far from being a trivial detail, serves as a lens through which we can explore the intricate interplay of faith, economy, and community in the medieval world. As we ponder the hidden stories of these minor figures and their petty rules, we gain insight into a time when even the smallest decisions were steeped in significance, a reminder that history is often found in the most unexpected places. The tiresome history of medieval monk candle wax reuse policies. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets of medieval Europe, the flickering light of candles became a vital source of illumination in monasteries. Monastic life revolved around prayer, study, and the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. Yet, beneath this austere surface lay an intricate web of petty rules and minor figures, particularly surrounding the reuse of candle wax. This neglected aspect of monastic life reveals not only the economic constraints of the era but also a curious tension between piety and practicality. ### minor figures and petty rules. While the abbots and bishops often commanded attention in historical accounts, it was the lesser-known monks, such as Brother Ealdred, the keeper of the wax, and Brother Albinus, the candle steward, who enforced the policies surrounding candle wax reuse. These minor figures played pivotal roles in managing the monastery's resources and ensuring that no drop of precious wax went to waste. Take, for example, the rule of Saint Benedict, which governed monastic life and was first codified in the 6th century. In its original text, it does not explicitly mention candles, yet the spirit of frugality can be seen in the stipulation that monks should live simply, sharing resources and avoiding excess. This principle laid the groundwork for the emergence of elaborate candle wax reuse policies across various monastic communities. By the 12th century, some monasteries had formalized their wax reuse policies into a series of petty rules. A crude ledger from the Abbey of St. Gall, dated 1152, provides insight into a particularly stringent regulation. If a monk is found to have used a new candle when a stub remained from the previous week, he shall be subject to 3 days of fasting and a public reprimand during Vespers. Such rules were not merely punitive, they reinforced the communal ethos that defined monastic life. ### case studies with dates and lists. The Abbey of Cluny, renowned for its wealth and influence in the 10th century, presents a compelling case study. A surviving document from 1080 lists the various candles used for specific purposes. 1. High Mass candles, 12 new candles each Sunday, with stubs to be melted down for reuse. 2. Vespers candles, 6 candles, which could be used for 3 consecutive evenings before melting. 3. Feast day candles, specially commissioned, these were allowed to be used only once, but the wax was to be collected and stored for later use in chapels. This meticulous record-keeping indicates not only a systematic approach but also a cultural reverence for the candle, which symbolized the light of Christ in the darkness of sin. Another example can be drawn from the Cistercian monastery of Clairvaux, where a 12th century monk named Bernard of Clairvaux famously argued against the extravagance of candle consumption during liturgical services. His admonitions led to the establishment of a guideline in 1145: no candle shall be lit that exceeds the height of a single finger of a monk's hand. This rule served multiple purposes. It cut costs and discouraged ostentation, but it also encouraged creativity among the monks, who had to innovate with shorter candles that burned just as bright. ##### Comparisons to other regions. The reuse of candle wax was not exclusive to the monastic communities in France and Germany. In England, for instance, the practices varied significantly. The Anglo-Saxon monastic rule of 930, as recorded in the monastic constitutions, emphasized frugality but allowed for greater flexibility in candle use. Monasteries in England often employed a system of shared resources that permitted the use of communal candles, leading to less stringent rules around reuse. In contrast, the Italian regions, particularly among the Benedictine and Franciscan orders, showed a different approach. The 14th-century Florentine monasteries, for example, had an entirely different relationship with candle wax. They often relied on local artisans who specialized in producing candles from tallow and beeswax, leading to a surplus. Consequently, while some rules existed, the abundance of materials led to a more relaxed attitude toward reuse. This divergence raises questions. Did the abundance of resources in one region foster a more lavish approach to spirituality, while the scarcity in another bred a deeper sense of piety? Or was it the very ethos of the monks themselves that dictated the practices surrounding candle wax? ##### Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological discoveries have illuminated the candle reuse practices of medieval monks, revealing the physical remnants of their resourcefulness. Excavations at the site of the former monastery of Jumiages in Normandy uncovered a series of wax stubs and remnants of candle molds. Carbon dating has placed these artifacts between 1040 and 1100 CE, suggesting that the practice of melting down used candle remnants was not only widespread but also a deeply ingrained aspect of monastic life. Moreover, a cache of medieval wax tablets found near the ruins of the Abbey of St. Peter in Glastonbury reveals further evidence of wax reuse policies. These tablets, used for writing, were often made from recycled candle wax, demonstrating a dual purpose for the material. The monks of Glastonbury were adept at maximizing their resources, and the recycling of candle wax for both illumination and writing materials reflects their commitment to frugality. One particularly intriguing find was a small, carved candle holder dated to the late 12th century, adorned with inscriptions from the Book of Psalms. This artifact suggests that the monks not only reused wax but also imbued their everyday objects with spiritual significance. What thoughts must have crossed a monk's mind as he lit a candle, knowing it was made from remnants of previous prayers? ####. The rhetorical questions that hook curiosity. What drove medieval monks to become such meticulous stewards of candle wax? Was it merely the need to conserve resources, or did these rituals serve as an expression of their faith, transforming a mundane task into an act of devotion? As we explore the intricacies of candle wax reuse policies, we uncover a tapestry woven with threads of economy, spirituality, and community. The simple act of lighting a candle becomes a profound reflection of the medieval monk's struggle between earthly needs and heavenly aspirations. Conclusion. The historical significance of candle wax reuse policies among medieval monks stretches far beyond the confines of economic necessity. It encompasses a complex interplay of spirituality, community, and resource management that defined monastic life. The seemingly trivial minutiae of candle use reveal the depths of devotion and practicality that coexisted in the hearts of these men dedicated to a higher calling. As we reflect on the wastefulness of our modern world, perhaps we can learn from the frugality and ingenuity of these medieval monks, who transformed the humble candle into a beacon of their faith. And that's a wrap. We've explored the quirky world of jellyfish and their glowing secrets. Who knew these floaty wonders could light up the ocean like a disco party? Water wave sparkles. Here's a surprising tidbit. Did you know that some jellyfish can potentially live forever? They've mastered the art of biological immortality, making them the true party animals of the sea. If you enjoyed this deep dive into jellyfish magic, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with your favorite fact. Want more aquatic adventures? Check out our related episodes on ocean mysteries and bizarre sea creatures. And hey, don't forget to turn on loop so you can let this episode play on repeat while you drift off to sleep. Sweet dreams, ocean explorers. ZZZ Milky Way.